And then a light bulb came on over my head, like in cartoons when a character gets an idea or an answer to a question. Damn it, my third child really wasn't mine. He was another man's biological daughter. I was on the phone with a genealogygurus.com representative asking why my daughter's DNA test had not been processed after 10 weeks. I gave her the test as an extra Christmas gift, and I gave the rep the appropriate numbers so they could track it down. After about 5 minutes of holding, he returned to the line and assured that the test had been processed. Additionally, it was a matter of confidentiality between the company and the person actually submitting the test, and he could not provide me with more information. But if you've processed it, why isn't it reflected in my DNA matches? I asked excitedly. Sir, there are several reasons why your daughter may not match your DNA, but I am not at liberty to discuss this particular test with you, he replied in a somewhat annoyed tone. And that's when the light bulb came on. Obviously, the number one reason she doesn't show up to my matches is because she doesn't fit. I ended the conversation stunned. I remember pressing the red end call button. Then I remember starting to cry. I woke up a few minutes later, curled up in the fetal position on the couch in the family room. I still had 15 minutes left before my lunch break, so I called my daughter, who was probably also on her lunch break since she was working in the same time zone as me. I know she usually curled up with a book at the table for lunch, so I wasn't worried about getting in the way. She answered the phone on the first ring. "Hey, Dad, what's wrong?" she said somewhat warily. "Pumpkin, you know I love you and trust you completely, but I don't know what's going on with the DNA test." I called the genealogy gurus on the phone, and they told me it was processed about 2 weeks ago. There was a sound of air being sucked in from her side, followed by silence for at least 10 seconds. "I know, Dad. We need to talk, but I can't do it here and now. Call me tonight, and don't be in the room with your mom when you call." I was in a fog as I returned to my office, and I have to admit that I didn't give my boss a productive day at the engineering firm where I worked. There were so many things in my head, so many questions, and the thought that my little girl is not my little girl. Since I am such an analyst, I knew that I had to prioritize my thoughts and then work on the problems one by one. I was the VP of engineering at Sisyphus Electronics for a reason, and at that point, I knew the best thing for me was to treat my personal problems like design problems and solve them in an orderly manner. The old man, Dwayne Sisyphus, taught me this himself when he hired me directly from Purdue University to work for his then-founded company. With Dwayne at the helm and me never too far from his right-hand man, Sisyphus grew into an industry leader, and we both made good profits. I made great money, had great benefits, and worked with great smart people. And then it got even better when I went home in the evening, where I had a beautiful, sexy wife and 3 wonderful children. Subsequently, the children grew up, left home, got married, and started having children of their own. At first, it was a little lonely at home, like empty nesters, but we found something to do, and I felt like the loneliness revitalized us as a couple again. But as I reflected back on the last month of my life, several small incidents stood out to me, including Marissa's phone call to my wife about 2 weeks ago. On Tuesday night, we were both sitting in the family room watching TV when Tracy's phone rang. She looked at it and told me it was Marissa, and then she answered. The conversation lasted about 5 minutes, with Tracy answering almost exclusively yes and no, and I could see tears welling up in the corners of her eyes. When she hung up, I asked if everything was okay, and she told me that Marissa's cat was having some health problems. "There's nothing to worry about," she said, although I noticed that she seemed a little nervous around me. I thought it was a little strange that she took Marissa's cat's health so personally. This phone call was probably when Marissa found out. Tracy didn't know that I sent Marissa a test. I didn't think it was even worthwhile. Marissa was the only one of the 3 children who was interested in genealogy, so I bought a kit online and forwarded it to her. I have been researching my family roots for many years, and I really enjoyed the DNA research part of it. I thought it would be great for Marissa to get a test, too. Obviously, I couldn't be more wrong about this. When I got home, I did my best not to act differently towards Tracy. even though I was seething inside. Save one problem at a time, one problem at a time, I repeated to myself. I met Tracy at Purdue my sophomore year. We didn't meet until senior year, but we've been inseparable ever since, or so I thought. We got married a year after graduating from college, 31 years ago, and to this day I would tell anyone that it was the best decision I ever made. At 54, she is still beautiful, and despite having 3 children, she works out regularly and has the body of a woman in her mid-30s. She is fun and funny, and to this day I was looking forward to spending the rest of my life with this woman. Around 8, I told Tracy that I needed to call the old man about a project we were working on and excused myself from the room. I actually grabbed my jacket and went outside to the porch swing so I could talk without worrying about Tracy's hearing. And then I called Marissa. Marissa answered the first call and sounded completely confused. "Sorry, Dad. I know I should tell you sooner, but Mom asked me not to say anything until she has a chance to talk to you," she blurted out before I could say hello. "I'm not mad at you. Calm down," I said more calmly. "I don't blame you for anything. You are a victim just like me." I could hear her breathing heavily over the phone. I knew it was killing her. "Reese, I want you to know that this doesn't change anything between us at all. I'm still your father and you're still my pumpkin. I've always given you kids all my love, and after all this time, I'm not going to stop now. Assuming you don't want me to stop." At that moment, she fell apart, babbling almost incoherently into the phone. "I love you, Dad. I don't want anyone but you. This is my pumpkin. Look, I don't want to put you in the middle, but you are my best source of information about DNA. We will not discuss other things so that you are not in the middle, but I need to know if you had a DNA match." "Yes, Dad, I am," she sighed. "Amanda Anderson was my half-sister. Mandy, Uncle George and Aunt Ginny's Mendy." "I'm sorry, Dad," she said quietly. "It's not your fault. You never have to apologize to me," I said more calmly. This meant that George Anderson, Uncle George to my children, Appellate Court Judge George Anderson to most of the rest of the world, was Marissa's biological father. Damn it. This meant that my wife entertained her boss when he was an attorney at the law firm of Gooey Howe and Associates. This meant at least 25 years ago, given that Marissa was 24 years old. By then, Tracy was his administrator. A few years later, he left the firm to become a state judge, moving to the state capitol before his career really took off. For her part, Tracy did not leave with George, choosing to stay with Guy Howe and finally ending up as an office manager. But over the few years that George and Tracy worked together, he and his wife Ginny became such good friends that our children still call them Auntie and Uncle, and their children still call Tracy and me the same. And a few times when I was on a business trip, Tracy and the kids came with George and Ginny for a few days at their lake house. Oh my gosh, the kids even talked a few times about Aunt Ginny taking them here and there. No mention of Uncle George or Mom being with them, and I didn't even think twice about it. I must have walked away at that point because I heard Marissa calling me, "Daddy? Dad?" "Sorry, I got lost in my thoughts. Thanks for your help, kid. Say hello to Drew." "Wait, Dad, what are you gonna do?" It was a legitimate question, but I didn't have a good answer, so I just told her the truth. "Not sure, kid." "Well, Dad, don't rush out and do something incredibly stupid. A little stupid is okay, but don't get yourself arrested or anything." I hadn't thought about shooting Tracy until that moment, but I had promised Marissa that I wouldn't get arrested, so I guess that took shooting out of the equation. I never break promises to my children. Convincing Marissa of our relationship was my #1 priority, and finding out who Tracy's partner in crime was my #2. Challenge #3 would be to proceed with the divorce after finding a new lawyer, since my current one is with the firm that Tracy works for. It definitely didn't work. Once I've had a good sit-down with the lawyer, I'll be dealing with the soon-to-be ex-Mrs. Clark Walters. It was cold at home. Whenever we were together, Tracy talked like a magpie. I think from pure nerves. She seemed to be trying very hard to keep me happy, suggesting that it might lessen the impact when I found out. Don't know. But there was definitely distance between us, and she wasn't going to be the one to break the ice. About a week later, I met with the lawyer, and when he found out that my wife was the office manager at Gooey Howe, he got a real nervous look on his face. I moved on to the next lawyer on my list, a woman in her 20s who just smiled when I remembered that Tracy was the manager of Guy Howe's office. This is what I was looking for, someone who would not be intimidated when one of Guy's great lawyers came forward to represent my wife. I laid out what little I knew about the fraud scenario, starting, of course, with finding out that my youngest child was not biologically mine, and discovering that he was Judge Anderson's child. "Appellate Judge Anderson?" asked my lawyer, Marie Robinette. "Exactly," I replied, looking at her face to see if I needed to find another lawyer. "That should be good," was all she said, and then we started discussing the breakdown of finances. Since we had good jobs with pensions and good benefits, Marie suggested that we simply split our total assets in half, keep our own pensions, and sell the house. This would leave us both in good shape, although I would be better off with more income and a better pension. Unless you really want to crush her over infidelity, over a child, or just a general lack of respect," she quickly added, waiting for a brief moment, as if she might just jump to the conference table to make amends for the wrong she had done to me. "Offense. I'm sure we'll settle, but I don't want to hurt her financially," I replied. "What about the judge? Are we going to prosecute him for anything? Because if we do, it becomes much more risky and increases your score significantly." "The judge is my problem, and I will take care of it as I see fit," I said sharply, apparently too briefly. "Got it," she replied. "If she doesn't fight it, it could take 6 months," Marie noted. "If she fights this, we could be talking for over a year." "I don't have any dates yet, so take your time and get it right," I told her. With Task 3 completed, it's time to complete Task 4, debriefing. I waited another week to see if Chairman Tracy would blow up. Saturday night was our usual date night, then we would come home, watch a movie, and make love. But Saturday sex was always special because we went to bed early so we had plenty of time to play. We were both usually exhausted when we finished and would just cuddle with each other before getting up to clean up. However, we didn't date for 2 weeks or have sex for as long because I just couldn't bring myself to do it after I found out about the affair and Marissa. Tracy never even questioned it, another sign that she knew I knew, but she was really good at abstinence. However, this had to end. I took her to a nice French restaurant, and we shared a bottle of wine and even had some great desserts. She was happier than I had seen her in weeks. Then, when we got home, I carefully took off her coat, led her to the kitchen table, pulled out a chair for her, and said those famous words, "We need to talk." Tracy kind of half smiled at me as I poured myself a Jack Daniels over the ice and offered her something from the liquor cabinet, which she cautiously declined. I put the drink on the table and looked her straight in the eyes. "It was a long time ago, Clark. George and I haven't slept together in about 20 years. Can't we just leave this as a mistake from the ancient past and leave it at that?" Well, I have to admit that I was glad that she wasn't trying to say that the DNA test was wrong, but was trying to make it easier by saying that it was so long ago that it doesn't matter anymore. Indeed. "Okay, the last time you had sex was about 20 years ago. When did you start having sex, how often, and why did you finally stop? I want to know everything. But first I need to know if baby number 1 and baby number 2 are his too." "No, Clark. Barry and Katie are yours. I didn't even sleep with George until a year after Katie was born. The affair lasted about 3 years at the beginning. Then we stopped when George decided to leave the firm and move. He waited about a year after we stopped to submit our first position to the judge because he wanted to make sure the background check would show he was clean. And then we only made love a few times at the lake house when Ginny innocently took in all the kids for fun. During the day, Ginny also didn't know at the time, although George eventually told her, and all 3 of us later had a peaceful conversation during which George and I promised her that we wouldn't date again. "Why didn't you ever tell me or try a peaceful plan with me?" I asked sharply. Tracy wiped her hands on her sleeves and replied, "I knew I could never tell you. You'll divorce me instantly, and I definitely didn't want that. I loved you. I still love you. You probably love George better, I said. Start and stop on his orders without thinking about me. I was your backup option. No, Clark, I love you with all my heart, she begged. No, you loved him with all your heart. You loved him so much that you gave him up so he could pursue his career dreams, knowing all along that I was your backup plan. You may have loved some things about me at that moment, but you knew that I absolutely adore the ground you walked on, and you counted on it and our family to help you lose him. Tracy looked down at her knees. It really hurt, and I knew I could handle it. What about Marissa? Obviously, he was dealing with you without protection, and you should have known where this could lead, and it did. I just thought that since you both have brown hair, brown eyes, and fair skin, no one would ever guess whose child she is. And I knew that you would have no reason to think that she was not yours. When she ended up looking like me anyway, I didn't have to worry about it until you went and sent her that damn DNA test. I honestly never knew about it. So it's my fault? I asked incredulously. No. George and I discussed this possibility, but I told him that he shouldn't worry because you have similar physical characteristics. I haven't heard from him for at least a couple of years since they were at Marissa and Drew's wedding 2 years ago. Well, no matter who knows what, Marissa is still mine as far as I'm concerned, and that's what I told her. I'm on the birth certificate, I raised her, I love her, she's mine. George better not have any ideas about this, and if he calls, you better tell him so. And by the way, I will do a DNA test on the other 2 children as soon as possible. I need to know for my own peace. Clark, Tracy hissed. I told you that they are yours. And you expect me to believe you? Why? I snapped. More than anything, Tracy was completely taken aback by my new lack of trust. What the hell did she expect? But I know that she was also very worried that I would tell the other 2 children about her infidelity. Nobody wants to look bad in front of their own children. So how often did you 2 do this and where? Finish the story, at least for me, I chided. We didn't plan this, Clark. It just came out. We spent so much time working together, and then we became friends, and it just kind of grew from there. He was kind, considerate, witty, funny, passionate. You know the man, and we connected on a deeper level. But since we had spouses whom we both loved, we kept this to a relative minimum and moved the meeting places, usually outside the city. No, we never met either here or at his house. It would be wrong on several levels. But that didn't stop you 2 from having fun at the lake house a few times after the affair supposedly ended and Ginny went out with the kids, I reasoned out loud. No, it's not like that, she practically whispered to me. But I swear to you, we haven't been intimate since then. And Jenny knows all this and has forgiven you both? I asked, shaking my head in disbelief. Yes, I told you. I don't think I can, I blurted, my voice hoarse with intense emotion. We know what we did was wrong, Clark. But it's been 20 years, and you haven't been harmed in any way by this while this has been happening. And can't we just go back to the way things were a few weeks ago? You were my loving man. I am your loving wife. Nothing should change. But everything has changed, Tracy, I said. I spent the better part of 3 weeks thinking about what I did wrong when you fell in love with another man, and wondering if I would ever trust you completely again, let alone trust you that much. To stay married to you. I gave you my heart completely, and you put it in your pocket and took it out when it was convenient for you. This should not be a marriage of convenience. It should be a full-time love marriage. At this point, Tracy began to cry. I hate it when she does this and usually tries to console her, but this time it was different. I went into the family room and turned on the TV, leaving her at the kitchen table. That night we slept in the same bed, but for the first time in a while we didn't sleep opposite each other. I moved as far away from her as I could on the queen-size bed and stopped her from sliding towards me when she entered. The look on her face was both shock and pain. I didn't care. Tracy cooked us a delicious breakfast on Sunday morning, and while we were eating, I brought up the topic of divorce. This novel happened more than 20 years ago. You didn't even know about it, for God's sake. It's done. Now let's just get on with life. She practically screamed at me. An error remains incorrect no matter how long ago it was, I shouted back at her. You deceived me. You lied to me. You deceived me and you broke my trust. These are not time-sensitive issues." I got up from the table, leaving half a plate of food, and went to mow the lawn. That was the last time I spoke to Tracy until Wednesday afternoon, when she told me that Ginny Anderson would be joining us this coming weekend. Needless to say, I wasn't happy, but Ginny was a long-time dear friend and had endured the same kind of deception that I had, so I decided I had to talk to her. Ginny showed up at 6 on Friday evening after a 2-hour drive from her house. She didn't take George with her. Tracy made a stuffed steak with mashed potatoes, and I grabbed a couple of bottles of Merlot to go with it. The conversation was light and friendly during dinner, then we went to the family room with our wine glasses for what I thought was the main event. Ginny started talking about the affair as if it were a historical topic, very sterile and quiet. But as the conversation continued, she became more emotional, and both she and Tracy had tears in their eyes. When George told me about the affair, I believed it was over for a couple of years, and he promised me it would never happen again, Ginny said. However, I have to admit that at first I was devastated, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that since it was over before I even knew it, I believed that I was not affected too much. And since I knew that Ginny was not some kind of gold digger, I apparently understood how this could happen. George's personality is kind of magnetic, isn't it? Although I didn't know about Marissa until a few weeks ago when everyone seemed to know about it. I really regret this, Clark. Ginny never mentioned the several times Tracy and George interacted after the end of the main affair at the Andersons' lake house. I wondered to myself if they even told her about this. I didn't bother going there. But I did think that George might be a great lawyer because Jenny almost apologized for George's affair instead of being upset about it. Unfortunately for Tracy, I'm not as determined as Ginny, and I'm not as keen on her oratory because I wasn't willing to give Tracy and George the gap that Ginny had, even if their romance ended 20 years ago. I'm just remembering what my life would have been like if I had left him and how things would have been so different for me and the girls, she continued. They say you should always think about whether your life would be better or worse if you left your wife, and I just know mine would be worse. Thank you for sharing this with me, Ginny. This is definitely food for thought. I will definitely have to take this into account, although there are several factors that I have to take into account, in particular the fact that, unlike you, I was not told about the affair. I found out completely by accident. Tracy knew it was wrong when she did it, and she knew what my reaction would be. So she decided it was probably for the best of all concerned if I never found out and just lived in ignorant bliss. And that's what it would be, except for the test. So 20 years later, I found out that the center of my world loved another man and was intimate with him, and then became a saint and abandoned him for his career, returning to me by default. Is that so, Tracy? My wife didn't say anything while Jenny was talking. She just sat quietly while Ginny told her story. She kept looking at me, trying to gauge my reaction. She didn't know that I knew she was watching, so I sat there listlessly while Ginny talked to drive Tracy a little crazy. My reaction to Ginny's story was not what Tracy wanted, or Ginny for that matter. They looked at each other with pain in their eyes. I shook my head, went into the kitchen, poured myself another glass of wine, returned to the family room and turned on the big screen, showing them both that I was done talking for the night. The women took the hint and went into the living room, where I heard them talking quietly. When whatever I was watching was finished, I turned off the TV, poked my head into the living room, said goodnight, and walked up the stairs to our bedroom. Ginny cornered me alone in the family room on Saturday and told me we needed to talk. I had no idea where Tracy was, but I said okay, and we went into the living room and sat on 2 chairs in the corner. Clark, I understand your pain. I really do. But not forgiving Tracy and breaking up with her would be a terrible mistake for both of you, Ginny began. You love her and she loves you. That should be all that matters. The rest is history, and it would be terrible for the two of you to spend the rest of your lives apart because of what happened 20 years ago. If I can forgive George, then you can definitely forgive Tracy. I honestly don't know if I can, Ginny. As I said yesterday, I wasn't told about this affair like you were. They didn't tell me because she knew it was wrong, and I wouldn't forgive her then. Why should I forgive her now? She deceived me for 20 years. She had an affair for several years and deceived me for another 20 years. How can I forgive her? How can I ever trust her again? I shook my head, stood up, and left the room, passing Tracy in the hallway. She was well aware of the conversation I had just had with Ginny, and she could see by the expression on my face that I had not moved an inch. Saturday dinner was very quiet. The women tried to talk. I had none of this. I didn't say 3 words throughout the entire meal. With a quick thank you, I grabbed my jacket and left, telling the couple I'd be in Malone, my favorite place for a quiet drink. When I approached Malone, Ronnie, the woman who owned the bar, was arguing with other customers in the back corner. Instead of taking a seat at the bar, as I usually do when I go in, I sat at a table by myself, feeling miserable and apparently looking even worse. Marnie, the bartender, came up to me with my regular Crown Black on ice and said I looked like my dog just died. Sort of, but nothing as important as my dog. Just my marriage. I chuckled weakly. Marnie walked up to Ronnie and whispered something in her ear. Ronnie apologized to the customers at the far end and came over to sit across from me at my table. "Okay, Superman, spill," she said. Ronnie was about my age, a somewhat large woman of Irish descent with freckles and red hair that she wore like a badge. Ronnie called me Superman because of my name, said it reminded her of Clark Kent, and swore to everyone that even though I was a good guy with a good job, she wouldn't want to see me get mad. We always laughed about it. I've been coming to Malone for 20 years, sometimes with Tracy, sometimes without, sometimes for food, sometimes just for a drink. Ronnie could read people, including me, quite well. She was like the sister I never had. "Tracy and I are done," I began. I hadn't told anyone about it by that point, and I have to admit, it felt good to finally get it out of my mind. I found out she cheated on me with her boss about 20 years ago. Not once, not several times, but for 4 damn years. My youngest, Marissa, belongs to him, and she thinks that since it was so long ago and I didn't know when it happened, I should just accept it and move on. She says she loves me, always has, and doesn't want to leave. "That little cheater," Ronnie exclaimed. "How dare she? You're not just going to give it up and let her stay, are you?" It was nice to hear that Ronnie agreed with me. I really appreciated her common sense, nonsensical way of looking at things, and if she thought differently, it would definitely make me reconsider my position. "Listen, Superman, it's a matter of respect, like anything else. I love Tracy. No, I love Tracy. But her deception was not done out of love, and certainly not out of respect. How could she let you think someone else's child was yours all these years?" I explained the matter with Marissa to Ronnie, noting that she really didn't know for sure, but Ronnie would have none of it, noting that denying the child testing was a convenient way of saying he didn't want to know. "Did she ever apologize for the affair or just apologize for hurting you?" This woman was good. "She never apologized for the affair. I don't even think she ever actually apologized for hurting me. I think the only thing she really apologized for was what I found out," I said. "I can't tell you what to do, Superman, but I think she already told you what you need to do. Sorry, Clark, the bar is at your disposal. We will call you a taxi at the end of the night. Give me your keys." I did as I was ordered. The taxi driver brought me to the house at about 2 o'clock in the morning. Tracy greeted us at the door and helped guide me up the stairs to our bedroom. I fell into bed fully dressed. Tracy took off my shoes and socks, and I fell asleep like that. Late Wednesday afternoon, I received a call from my son from the office. He wanted to talk to me about the situation with Tracy. He didn't say it, but apparently Tracy decided she needed to call in the heavy hitters of the kids to get me out of the divorce. My son and I are usually on the same page about most things, but I realized while talking to him that Tracy did a great job, and it paid dividends because he certainly saw her side of this divorce. "Dad, breaking up with Mom would be the stupidest thing you've done since you wore a leisure suit in the 70s, he tried to joke with me. "Seriously, Dad, divorce. For something she did 20 years ago, you didn't even know a few weeks ago. This is the woman you said you loved and wanted to spend your whole life with just a few weeks ago, and now you're ready to give it all up and probably live the rest of your life on your own mistake. Seriously, Dad? First of all, Barry, the mistake she made the first few times she had sex with him. After a few months, it's a solution, not a bug. What would you do if you found out that Linda was cheating on you? I probably would have torn her head off. But you didn't catch her. 20 years have passed. The physical act is over. The deception and lack of respect continue. I replied coldly. Barry, I thought you were smart enough to stay out of this and not take sides. But you obviously jumped in where a child shouldn't, stood between your parents. And why, Barry? I won't change my mind. I'm the aggrieved party here and you're just annoying me. I put this woman on a pedestal. I worshipped the ground she walked on and she knew it. She was never going to tell, and if it weren't for the accident, I would have gone to my grave worshipping her, and she just used me as a second choice when the man she loved most didn't want to marry her. Dad, aren't you being a little dramatic here? I think he was still talking when I hung up. When I walked in the door around 6 p.m., Tracy's was almost done with what smelled like delicious food. She didn't look happy when I told her I wasn't hungry, poured some Jack into a glass, turned on the TV, and sat down in my favorite chair. She came in and asked me what was wrong. Same shit, different day. My wife cheated on me for 4 years, had a baby with another guy, and now my kids are telling me I'm the bad guy here. Do me a favor, call Katie tonight and tell her not to call me tomorrow unless she wants to hook up like Barry. Tracy lowered her eyes. You'd think that 31 years later she'd know that other people don't annoy me on her behalf. What makes you think this divorce won't happen? I said, raising my voice. Not only did you cheat on me for 4 years with another man and have his child, but you replaced me in your heart with him. Can you sit here and tell me that you weren't in love with him, and that if he had asked to break up with me and marry him, you wouldn't have done it? And here's the thing. You may love me, but you are not in love with me. You're in love with him. I'm just a safe backup plan because you always knew you had my heart, and I would do anything for you as long as I thought you were mine. You betrayed me, you deceived me, you disrespected me, and now you are brazenly trying to turn our children against me. This was the last straw, Trace. But no, I won't be cruel to you, especially Jenny, or ruin George's wonderful career as a clean judge. I'll file a case of irreconcilable differences, and we can each keep our own retirement account and share the house and everything else. Tears rolled fast and furious down Tracy's cheeks. And as she stood up from her chair, I threw another thing at her. You still never told me that you regret cheating. Probably because you don't regret it, which is at least honest. The only thing you regret is what I found out, isn't it? I spent the rest of the night hugging my bottle of Jack. I called my lawyer the next day and told her that she needed to get her divorce papers done as soon as possible. She told me I could watch them next Tuesday. She could have them ready to go out on Wednesday, and Tracy could submit them on Thursday. I told her to deliver her server to my house that Friday night. I wanted to be there when she was served. So I called Judge George Anderson's office and told his administrator that I needed him to call me back about an important matter. He would know exactly why I was calling, and I knew he would call me back as soon as possible. George looked a little worried when he answered my call about 2 hours later. Yes, he knew exactly why I was calling, although he didn't think he wanted to do it in his office. I completely agreed and told him that I would come to meet him at home with Ginny the following Saturday at 10 a.m. He didn't know that Tracy wouldn't be brought in the night before, although I'm sure he would have known by the time I drove 2 hours to his luxurious home. During dinner at Malone's on Saturday night, Tracy admitted that Ginny had called her and told her about my meeting with George the following Saturday. She wanted to know if I wanted some company during the trip. "This is not a social visit, Tracy," I said. "George and I have some things to talk about. You don't need to be there. You may remember that he is an appellate court judge with an excellent reputation, who may even make the shortlist for Supreme Court judges one day. If you go over the grant with him, you could be arrested. And besides, you promised me you wouldn't do anything that would harm his career." "That's right. Choose him over me again. But don't worry. I intend to keep my promise. I won't do anything that would remove him from the short list of potential Supreme Court justices. God forbid. The show must go on." After telling the old man in the office about what was going on in my life, I found a couple of hours of personal communication and met with my lawyer to check the divorce papers. I gave her the go-ahead. When I returned to leave, she asked me if I had any plans for Judge George. "Now, why would you worry about it?" I asked, winking at her. "Because I am still handling some criminal cases, and I believe you may need a good lawyer. You engineers don't seem to get too emotional about a lot of things, but I know you're pretty tough and your methodical approach to things scares me." She handed me her card, and I left the office. For the next 3 days, time passed quickly. We were working on a big project in the office, and it allowed me to focus on something other than life. The old man even told me that he was shocked at how focused I was despite the adversity in my life. I told him I was glad that at least something was going well. But on Friday night before I left, I told him about Tracey being served, and I had run into Georgie and warned him that if things went wrong I could end up in jail on Monday. He assured me that he had my back, and the money was bail. We went for a handshake. I came home to another wonderful-smelling meal that Tracey had prepared. She recently outdid herself in trying to get me to focus on her many skills. She truly was a great cook. I almost felt guilty because I knew what would happen after lunch. We ate the food mostly in silence, as we had been doing for the past few weeks, although I made sure to tell her how great the food was. After all, I'm not an ungrateful bastard. Then I helped her wash the dishes. But as we were about to go to the family room for an evening of TV, the doorbell rang. It was almost equal to 7. I knew it wasn't for me, so I didn't move to get it. Tracey gave me a funny look, then walked to the door and opened it. A well-dressed young man was on the porch, and he asked Tracey if she was Tracey Walters. When she answered in the affirmative, he handed her the envelope, said, "You have been served," returned in heels, and left. Tracey didn't move from where she stood, but I could see when her shoulders were shaking, she was crying. I walked past, closed the front door, and led her by the shoulders back to the kitchen table. She looked completely stunned, even though I told her this was going to happen. We sat in silence for what seemed like an eternity, but in reality it was only 5 minutes. Finally she muttered, "You bastard," and ran upstairs to our bedroom. I didn't follow her. The hardest part was done. On one of the few occasions we got married, I didn't sleep in the same bed as Tracey that night. I went to the bedroom we had set up as a guest room and fell asleep there, although calling it sleep was generous. I broke up with the woman who, a few weeks ago, I considered the light of my life, my soulmate, my everything. Despite everything going on, we were still sleeping in the same bed. I believe neither of us wanted to be the one to make the move. But now it's over, at least in my mind. I got up and showered, and when it was time to get dressed, I very quietly went into the bedroom and grabbed what I needed, being very careful not to wake Tracey and maybe start something. I didn't look to see if she was sleeping. I just took my clothes and left. I went casual, shirt collared, a decent pair of Levi's, and my steel-tipped cowboy boots that I made for myself when we visited our son at his home in Dallas. I left a little earlier than I needed to. I didn't want to be late for this meeting. If I had gotten there earlier, I could always kill time in the cafe, which is what I did. I stood on George and Ginny's porch at 10 o'clock and rang the bell. Ginny, beautiful as always, but very nervous, opened the door. "I'm sorry it ended this way," was all I could say as she leaned over to congratulate me. She didn't answer. She took my hand and led me into the den where George had all of his memorabilia and photographs laid out. George was sitting in his favorite chair, but when we entered, he stood in front of the chair. "Hey, Clark." "Hi, George." Ginny looked downright scared as she left the room. We stood about 6 feet apart, looking at each other. This was a man whom I at one time considered almost an older brother. We were so close. George was 2 years older than me, about the same size, but the gentle life of the last 20 years had added about 30 pounds more to him, about 20 in his round belly. We shared our hopes and dreams with each other. We walked together. We fished together. We hunted together. I was proud to call him my friend, proud of where his refereeing career had taken him. Now, standing in front of me, assessing me with his eyes, he was no longer a friend, but an enemy. The man who stole my love and ruined my life. Suddenly, I got angry. "You keep my wife's heart," I shouted to him. "You also have the opportunity to maintain your egregious image because I promised Tracy that I would never tell anyone about this, and I will not break my promises to this woman." At this point, I took a long, quick step forward with my left leg and then lifted my right leg forward and up, my target being his groin. George reacted even slower than I expected, and my metal-tipped boot hit the target. At that moment, Ginny ran into the room, saw her husband on the floor, and ran to him. He continued to scream in agony, and she really couldn't do anything to console him. She looked at me with pain. I took my cell phone out of my pocket and dialed 911. "There was an accident at Judge George Anderson's house," I said. "We need an ambulance in this place." I turned on my heel and headed for the door, but before I could get there, Ginny grabbed my right arm. I thought that I might have to hit the woman, but instead of hysteria and anger, she had a calm expression on her face. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you. We know what to do." I hugged her back, left the house, got into the car, and drove home, knowing that the cops wouldn't come for me. Ginny understood this quite well and would explain it to her husband sometime in the future when he had time to think carefully. The drive home was cathartic. I really don't know, but after months of ripping my heart out every day, I felt free. It's funny, but when I finally realized Tracy's betrayal, the pressure on my heart eased, and then I was able to think clearly enough to do what was right for me. This might be the right decision for everyone concerned, but sometimes you just need to take care of yourself. It's what everyone else has been doing for the last 20 years. Why not me now? Yes, I knew that part of me would always love Tracy, but I wasn't going to spend any more time studying this novel. This was not my creation, and it was not my choice. It's time to move forward. When I got home, I went down to the basement, grabbed a couple of suitcases, and went to our bedroom. I walked past Tracy, who was sitting in the family room, and she followed me into the bedroom. "Is that all?" she asked. Just like that. 31 years old and out the door? Tracy, I'm sorry that you're so wrapped up in yourself that you don't see how you've hurt me. How you trampled 24 years of my love with your deception. You don't see it, and you probably never will. I've come to terms with it, and I don't hate you. I don't even hate George, although the poor guy probably thinks so now. I'll make peace with Barry and Katie somewhere in the future. You can make peace with Marissa as quickly as possible. Poor girl is a mess. Sign the papers, Tracy, and let's get this thing done. I will remove the rest of the things from here in the coming days. I don't think we really need to talk anymore. If you have anything to tell me, I will put my lawyer's card on the kitchen table. She was amazed, with tears in her eyes, but without words. I took the suitcases, went downstairs, and put them in the truck of my car. I returned to the house, grabbed a few small items, and left. 31 years old, just like that. I made a mistake. In fact, after 8 months, no one in the family talks to me anymore. I don't care. The official story is that Judge George fell hard on the corner of his ornate desk in his lair, lifted himself up violently, and then did it again as he fell to the floor. The press called it a domestic accident. To be delicate, he received a lot of favorable press. I think this will not prevent him from being shortlisted by the Supreme Court. Tracy signed the divorce papers within a week, and the divorce was granted last week. The house will be sold at auction. Tracy hasn't tried to call me since I left. Barry and Katie didn't call either. I don't think I'll be invited to the family Christmas dinner, no matter where it is. The old man hands over the company to me for the new year when he retires. The agreement is that I have to run the company for 7 years before I can retire as a rich man with a very golden parachute. Then he will find someone to buy the company, and I will also receive 10% of this agreement. I also started going out to social events. I think I mean a date. It will take me a while to remember exactly how to do this. However, word of the divorce spread quickly, and several of our divorced women called to inquire about my interest. In fact, 2 or 3 of Tracy's divorced friends also called, expressing surprise that she would even let me run away. I have to admit, It was good for my ego. A good life awaits me ahead, full of challenges like professional, so personal. I'm working on taking up new hobbies with the extra time I have on personal matters. However, one hobby I have given up is genealogy. I've had enough.